Chapter 4. Everything was asphalt and gas fumes, and he couldn't breathe in even a hint of ocean from the scorching midday air. He called the bakery to let them know the van had overheated behind an accident that had traffic snarled up through town. A passing cyclist helped him navigate to the curb and out of danger, and in return, Mateo gave him a box of potato rolls. The guy asked for his number to go along with the bread, tipping his chin up with laughter, when Mateo slapped a hand against the bakery's contact info on the side of the van. The look in his eye might have burned and intrigued on another day. A day when Alicia hadn't, yet again, frozen his skin with her icy insistence on keeping their sex life sealed off from everything else that kept her alive. Sometimes she'd share her joys but never her sorrows. Only inadvertently her troubles. Wayward wisps of her dreams. Not one piece of her past. Before they'd slept together, he thought he belonged in the inner chambers of her heart. Sitting around beach bonfires with her and her brothers and the rest of their early-to-bed gang, watching the sunset, tossing sticks at the flames and bullshitting about their lives. Overblown stories with confessional truths embedded inside. Unexplored sparks when limbs slid together in passing. Friendly kisses turned intentional when they had the screen of too much alcohol to blame. And then she went home with him. No excuses, no pretenses. She led him to his own bedroom, deliberate. And stayed for 3 days, despite his rising before 4 every morning. He'd spent those days whistling while he worked, no matter how often his dad repeated, "Settle down, Matt. Settle down." Easier said than done. After the initial rush of exploring each other inside out, Alicia retreated to Pier 3 and established the routine of morning delivery sex. No more sleeping over, no stopping by after work. Sitting away from him at bonfires. Never hiding that they slept together, never suggesting they stop. Rolling her eyes when he hinted at romance. Someone honked and he swiveled to glare. Nothing he could do about the van until it cooled down, and nothing was cooling down anywhere around him just then. The day was too long as it was, and he had a last delivery to make before turning in the keys for good. Sean could drive every run in future. He didn't have to keep searching for respite in Alicia's arms. She didn't want his heart or soul, and plenty of people, the biker who'd waved with elaborate sass as he pedaled off was just one example, would be happy to keep him around for his body. The irritated driver edged past. The sun baked the air around him, and half an hour dripped by before the van cooled. When he finally got it back to the bakery, his father met his announcement about no more driving with, "Settle down, Matt." 2 mornings later, Sean did not show up. No call, no text, no astral projection to tell them where the hell he was. Mateo tried to palm the deliveries off on someone else, but his father just said, "Don't make everything so complicated, Matt." His mother gave him her, "Do you want your poppy's blood pressure to go haywire again? Look." So he grabbed the keys. Pulling into Pier 3, he thought that for once Alicia was not waiting for him. That idea flew out the window when she clattered down the stairs from her apartment. Each thud on the metal treads as she descended reverberated in him. Right as he stepped out and shoved the door closed, she came to a halt. 5 steps up, but he caught the brief flare of her eyes and flush of her cheeks. She took it as invitation. His syllables still hung in the air, and she bounced down to the concrete and right up against him. Her hands on his ass, her teeth grazing his ear. Undulating. And maybe he meant to brush her off. Maybe his intentions could have held. It was possible she could be put off despite his breath hitching. Despite his hardening cock. Despite the way his heart raced at the proof that she's missed at least one part of him. Then she moaned and murmured, "Please come upstairs," and his resolve dissolved like sugar in warm milk. She'd gone too long without touching the man. Not so long that she'd forgotten about his whole arrogant, "Don't you just pine for me when I stay away? Don't I know you better than you know yourself?" line of questions. Just long enough for her to throw out any notion of playing like she didn't want him. Seemed she was in luck. No protests about deliveries, no badgering her to proclaim some goddamn undying love. Just their bodies, their mouths, their heat. Exactly what she wanted. All the physical fun with none of the forcing of emotional nonsense. A fabulous stress reliever, a hit of energy to start her morning, a respite from all the goddamn thinking she always had to do. She tugged him by the wrist, backing them into her apartment. He was still in his baking clogs, and she ignored that she knew what it meant that he'd left his sneakers at home. He hadn't intended to deliver that day. Which meant this was not a planned fuck. Didn't mean she couldn't enjoy it. Didn't mean her heart wasn't racing or her clit wasn't thrumming with each move they made together. Part of the Sex Buddies Compact, pretty much all of the Sex Buddies Compact in fact, was orgasms whenever they were both free, and no need to make any elaborate date-like plans first. Less romance, more thrusting. Her bed wasn't more than 30 steps from the door, even with navigating her folding screen and ottoman. Barely enough time to kick off her sandals and strip off her shift dress, but she managed. Mateo, the show-off, contrived to be balls out naked in the same span. Alicia wasn't going to let him win, so her undergarments were on the floor when she scooted across the bed to open her bedside table. And then it was a tussle between them, tongues, condom, legs, nipples, hips, rolling and pinning and opening and moaning. Fuck, you smell good. You're the one who's all yeast and sugar. He nudged his nose along her collarbone. I smell like work. You smell like you. Hot and salt and coffee. That's the beach and work, she laughed. Because fun. She and Mateo were only about fun. Growling, he bit at her shoulder and thrust deep and fast into her. It stopped her breath for longer than felt possible. She was poised and edgy. His hand shackling her wrists was the only anchor stopping her free fall. She felt almost shy when she raised her gaze to meet his. When you laugh, I feel it to my toes, he said. Just that, all soft and intent and low. Serious. And then his lips brushed her nipple, and she gasped in all the air she'd been missing, and he pivoted his hips that way he had whenever they made it to a horizontal surface, and she plummeted into orgasm. Chapter 5. He chest hadn't caught up to his breath yet, but she swatted at his shoulder. Time to get back to work. Huh. I mean it. I have reports to run. Everything worked out with the bank? He didn't know why he bothered asking. One syllable of friendly concern and she bounded off the bed, leaving him cold in the morning air. It's all good. Or it will be. He scrubbed at his scalp as he sat up. Sniffed his pits. 5 deliveries left, followed by 4 more hours at the bakery. I'm hopping in the shower. She unearthed her robe from the pile of clothes on her ottoman. Suit yourself. Her bathroom was tidy for once. Nothing overflowing the hamper, clean towels stacked in the rack. Those first days she'd spent at his place, he'd offered to pick up any kind of product she liked, and was met with derision. Why can't my hair get just as clean as yours with your shampoo? Which fine was a point. And it wasn't that he expected her to be high maintenance because of her gender. He'd been with men whose toiletry budgets were triple his. In truth, he'd offered because once he started spinning dream webs about her being in his place all the time, he wanted to shore up those dreams by making his space comfortable for her. Maybe that overeagerness had spurred Alicia shutting down his romantic side. Maybe he'd been such a sap, she thought he was a sure bet on her terms. Maybe he rolled her way every time she refused to meet him in the middle. Hanging up his towel and slipping back into the clothes that hadn't been all the fresh at 4 that morning, he contemplated again some more his next moves. When he emerged from the bathroom, she was tucked up in her computer chair, not glancing his way. Shop unlocked. Nothing like the reluctant half-tilt of her head to convey the monitor was of far more interest than his words. Sorry? For the delivery. Is the door unlocked? She shook her head slow, then fast and decisive as she stood and approached. His keys and hers were entangled in a straw bowl on the hall table. She made short work of separating them and tossing his at him as she held the door for them to head down. At the base of the staircase he paused, looking out across the parking area towards the pier and the Pacific beyond. High tide and no fog for once. You unloading or what? Mateo turned her way. She'd pulled on shorts and a tank under her robe, and knotted her dark hair up in a bun. It's a pretty morning, come see. He watched her weigh the path of least resistance before walking the few feet between them. He took her hand and wove them past the parking signs until they stood at the edge of the beach. A few people fished off the downside of the pier, and the surfers kept the truce by staying on the northernmost waves. The sun was low enough that the water was mostly dark, with purple-pink hints as it lapped the shore. Nice. She squeezed his hand as she said it. He was hyper-alert to her pulling it away, but no. She rested against his side as the breeze skimmed along their skin. He agreed. He lifted his phone with his spare hand. Selfie? At that, she straightened. Not before my first cup of coffee. I didn't wake you up plenty? 'Cause we can go again. Ha. She retreated towards the cafe. Fine. He put his back to the ocean and aimed the camera. By the time he was satisfied with his shot, she was waiting inside Pier 3 for him. Not another word from her as he worked. She leaned against the strip of wall between the bathroom and supply closet doors, watching him. Looking away when he caught her eye. Sitting in the silence that descended after the clunk and rattle of the dolly, he wheeled over the threshold, nothing but the wind-rushed waves echoing the watery feeling in his gut. She would never bend to his will, which was amazing and beautiful to him. Her self-possession and determination and surety. If ever there was a person no one would snap at to get it together and be decisive, it was Alicia. Sometimes he didn't know if he admired her or wanted to body swap with her. Regardless, he'd learned a few lessons by observing her tight control in the months they'd been hooking up. So far, neither those lessons or his own instincts had prompted the changes he so deeply desired. It was time for a new tactic, even if he broke his own heart deploying it. He took a steadying breath, braced his feet to ground himself, and faced her. Their little stroll meant her feet were itchy with sand, and the sex meant she needed a shower, and her deadline for the loan officer meant her spreadsheets were calling. So he didn't need to act so life and death about her little impatient gesture when he pulled out his phone again. What do you think? The wet sand was a drying crust between her toes. She barely glanced at his screen. Of? This pic. Oh, it was Reassure the handsome man time, was it? You know you're a hunk. It looks great. The chef coat isn't too weird with the ocean background? She looked again. She'd not noticed his work clothes, really. Mostly it was just his eyes and the locks of breeze-ruffled hair and the way the morning light limned the sharp line of his jaw. I mean, that's just what you look like. Are you putting this on Instagram or something? #morning break while the waves break? He snorted a light laugh. No. I thought I'd use it for my profile pic. What about the plan to be the last man in California not on Twitter? It's not a plan, I don't have a stance about it. It just gets too binary when I look for my place there, so I skip it. Besides, I meant my dating profile. There was sand grit on her calves too. She wanted to rub it off, but he'd probably read it as her being uncomfortable or something. And she only cleared her throat because the salt air choked her up a little. You're on the apps? Well, not yet. No. He stashed the phone in his pocket, like he wasn't willing to share the glow of his image with her anymore. But I want a dating life, what we have. The sex? An upward nod. Yes. The sex? It's great. And I'd rather date you than anyone else I know. But since you won't, and I need more, I've got to meet people. Online seems like a good place to start. Sand or salt, or maybe the dawn was breaking enough to awaken whatever little bugs slept overnight and couldn't wait to start biting at her limbs in the morning. Something made her itch. You're going to date people and fuck me? If I get to that point with someone else, he didn't drop his gaze, we're done. Or if it bothers you, we can stop now. Her breath was steady. Or no less steady than usual after they'd been together. Why would I be bothered? No. You wouldn't. Of course. He ran a palm over his hair. So. I'll just let you know. Or keep your pants zipped next time you deliver, that'll be our sign. Mateo nodded. short and flat-eyed. She didn't feel like smoothing over his mood. She had hydrocortisone to locate, quarterly reports to run. She didn't so much as squeeze his ass as he hefted the empty dolly into the van. One thing she had to check, though, before he left. He was strapping in the dolly, so she spoke to his broad back. You wouldn't date my cousins? Noah and Valerie had both been known to go all giggly making innuendos about him, and she didn't want to watch how they would preen and press against his sturdy strength. Mateo turned. If he'd batted an eye, she'd missed it. No, you're the only Wells I want to fuck. She retreated upstairs before he could slam himself into the front seat and take off for his next destination. Chapter 6. The guy, Jackson, from the afternoon of the overheated van came into the shop. Mateo might not have clocked him, except for the way he kept bouncing up on the balls of his feet to peer beyond the register counter. He'd been standing at the pass-through bundling receipts, and Jackson's treetop height and fuchsia beanie caught his attention. The guy's eyes quirked up happily when he rounded the corner. Hey, bakery man. I wasn't sure I'd find you here. In the grip of habit, he scrubbed his hands with the tail of his apron before extending one for a shake. Mateo James. Nice to see you again. Oh, part of the famous James family? Maybe I didn't have to worry you'd be fired for failing to deliver on time. The cheesy, flirty reply about always delivering on time froze on his tongue. He wasn't expecting to fall into banter like that. Swallowing back the words, he went for an expansive gesture with his arms. Job security and all the buns I can eat. So much for not flirting. Jackson introduced himself, fumbling with the strap of his backpack in an objectively cute way. Mateo tipped his chin towards an open table. Got time for chat? If you've got time, I've got time. He held up a bakery bag full of cookies. Probably you've had your fill, but I'm willing to share. Give me just a sec. And like that, his apron was on a hook and he was on a date. Or something that disoriented him like a date. Something any onlooker would code as a date. Chatting, asking get-to-know-you questions, eye contact. Exchanging numbers. Jackson asked, and what was he supposed to do? Suggest that the man show up and buy cookies anytime he wanted to talk to him. Rude. Besides, he dropped hints about going up to Pride together. It made him feel craven, but bitter experience taught him that turning up with men let him relax into automatic inclusion in ways he didn't get if his date's gender was female. Sometimes he just wanted to dance without being side-eyed as an interloper. By erasure, everyone's doing it. Sometimes he even did it to himself. And yeah, he'd figured out it was self-defensive, to erase a part of his identity before Poppy could. Didn't mean he wasn't suppressing some temper at himself. The real problem, as always in the past months, was that all else being equal, Alicia was the person he wanted to be with. Cute young draftsmen with a hankering for his ginger snaps were great for his ego, but his heart was still bruised. She hadn't sent word or stopped by in the 9 days since he'd been clear that he wanted more. No sunset knocks on his door, no cryptic messages on the cafe order forms, no texts. As far as he could tell, she'd forgotten he existed. So his more fragile than expected ego was very much out of sorts. From the register counter, Eleanor sent him a matronly wink of approval as Jackson left. He headed back to his receipts, sticking in his earbuds so he could pretend to not overhear anyone's gossip about him. He'd spent a week ignoring sympathy about his broken heart, hints about young people he should meet, snark about Pier 3. He'd only broken his calm facade when Sean was nasty about Alicia, only to find him and the other bakery guys watching with smirks that showed he'd been goaded into the outsized reaction. Hair-trigger temper but never a grudge, he'd reminded himself, and let it go. A hand clamped on his shoulder and his dad louder than necessary despite his playlist. Matt? He startled and turned, searching his father's face for signs of redness or strain. Poppy, what's wrong? Calm yourself, Matt. Always jumping, and never in any direction but to the wrong conclusions. Right. Because there was not the least cause for concern. His dad's latest checkup had ended in a detailed lecture about lifestyle modifications, and his mom was in Sacramento at the moment, visiting Tia Alma. Mateo had the cardiologist's number in his favorites and never left the bakery unless Eleanor was on shift. Her CPR training was out of date, but it was better than nothing. "Okay, I'm calm," he lied. The argument wasn't worth raising Poppy's blood pressure. "Did you need anything?" "Just the name of that equipment rental place." Mateo glanced through the door to the kitchens. "Something broke down?" His dad shook his head. "Ticking along great here. Stop fretting." "Right. Good." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. "Hustle up, son. I've got Abraham Wells tying up the phone line in there, looking for help. Something with their refrigeration. Need to give him the info so I can call your mom back." "Oh, not acceptable." Mateo headed to the office, ignoring the admonitions of his apparently still healthy dad. He picked up the receiver. "Abe. What's up?" "Mateo. Hey, it's the big fridge. Alicia thought it was just dirty fan blades, but the thermostat's not right, and I'm worried about the coils. Repair can't get out here for a couple of days, so I thought I'd check with that equipment rental place you mentioned." He was patting his pockets for keys and double-checking Eleanor was on shift until closing while Abraham rambled on. "I'll grab my tools and be right over." "No man, I can't ask." "You didn't ask. See you in 5. He hung up, texted his sister about his leaving Poppy on his own, and told his lurking dad, "Phone's all yours. I'll bring dinner by later." Ignoring Poppy's inevitable protests about not needing to be babysat, Mateo headed out to do battle with the refrigerator and, if he had his guess, a very irritated Alicia. She'd shoved the shelving unit as much out of the way as it got and moved the desk chair and a couple of bags of whole beans out to the delivery door's parking area. Wedged into the space she'd created, she shone her flashlight under the unit in search of any leaks or cracks or invading imps she could sweep away and have just this one problem of her life be easy to solve. Someone came in and thunked something heavy and rattly down on the concrete floor before nudging her tennis shoe. She twisted out of the space and swept back the hair that had fallen from her messy bun. Mateo stood there looking like the patron saint of handymen, with one hand on the side of the unit as if to confirm that it was indeed not chilling anything. Her own temperature was climbing higher. She started to ask what the hell he was doing, but Abraham answered that question by stopping in the doorway and clapping his hand on Mateo's shoulder. "Thanks for coming, man. You didn't need to do that." Mateo shrugged. "We have one of these 1200 series too. There's a thing with," he waved his hand in a half circle like that made any sense. "It set us back a bit last year, but I took notes on how to reset it. It's not tricky, just one of those things they don't put in the owner's manual, so you end up paying for repairs or upgrades instead of getting the chance to maintain it yourself." He reached down. Did he think she needed help to rise from her awkward position? She had one leg stretched into the limited floor space, the other curled under her, so she could use it to leverage herself behind the fridge. She'd pretzeled herself into this mess. She could get herself out. Mateo didn't take her glare for an answer though, just leaned further towards her and liberated the flashlight she was holding. "It should be behind this panel." He shone the light on the other side of the unit, barely glancing to see she'd cleared out of the way before shoving a hulking mass of broken machinery into the place she'd just occupied. She couldn't get past him to see what he was looking at, but just like that he'd boxed her in. He tilted into the newly created space and ran the light down the back corner of the unit. "Yeah, here it is. I'm not positive this will do it, but hey." He handed Abe the flashlight and crouched to dig in his toolbox before straightening. He briefly met her eyes. "I gave Abraham the number of the equipment rental place in San Jose, on the chance this doesn't do it. And I loaded a couple of coolers into my car, in case you need us to store anything at the bakery while you wait. He said you already checked the fan? And I'm guessing you didn't find any leaks down there." He had to go and acknowledge her work, plus ensure she knew he was responding to a request for help, instead of charging in and taking over like she had no independent skills. For days and days now, she'd been wondering if he would come back to restart their arrangement. And instead of pestering her or yelling about his poor deprived prick, he was going out of his way to be respectful and friendly and helpful without stepping over any boundaries. Not asking anything of her heart. Looking like a goddamn snack while doing it too. She wiped her overheated face on her sleeve. When he paused to check for some kind of miracle refrigerator repair solution on his phone, she shot the glare of aggravation he so richly deserved Abraham's way. She could shove past Mateo and her brother too. Leave them to it. Or stay trapped in the corner of the office with nothing to do but watch Mateo's muscles flex and shift as he worked on her broken unit. She wasn't in the mood to risk touching Mateo to get by, so she leaned back against the filing cabinet and pointedly did not stare at his thigh. Because fine, he was taking time out of his workday when they had an equipment crisis. Fine, he had expertise he was sharing like the refrigerator whisperer of Surfside. Fine, the laughing triumph in his voice when his trick worked and the refrigerator churned back to life appealed on some gut-twisting level. Fine, he offered Abraham a double high-five in celebration of the repair, when she knew it pissed her brother off that way too many people treated his prosthetic like it was untouchable. Fine. Fine. She took her flashlight and slammed it back into the desk drawer. Shouldered the shelving and refrigerator back into place. Abraham gave her a slight shake of the head and finally cleared out of the office doorway. She crossed her arms at Mateo. He'd saved them not just the expense of the repair or worse, a replacement, but the time lost and the food that would have gone bad. Thanks for that. He smirked at her petulant tone. Swept her a bow. Glad I could be of service. Since the alternative was to slam him against the humming fridge and plaster her mouth to his, she stomped away and up her stairs for a too desperately needed cool shower.